Welcome to our webcast, Safety System Modernization, How to Build Your Winning Business Case, 7 Essential Steps to Take Now, sponsored by Schneider Electric. I'm your moderator, Mark Hosky, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Control Engineering, part of CFE Media and Technology. To get the best results from the webcast platform, please make note of the following as you participate in today's event. If you're having technical problems, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of your screen to bring up a list of system checks to make before escalating to an online technician. If you're experiencing issues with your slides or audio, please refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's headshot. You can control the volume settings of the webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or adjusting the volume on the webcast platform. If you need a technician, type a message into the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Answers to your technical questions will be in the Answered Questions box on the left side of your screen. During the presentation, you can use the Ask a Question box on the left side of your screen to type questions for the speakers to answer during the Q&A session at the end. You may ask questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Questions that are for today's presenters will be answered verbally during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. To download the presentation slides and a certificate of completion, use the Event Resources tab on the left side of your screen. The webcast is being recorded including the Q&A session. We'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website in a few days, and we'll send you an email with a link to the archive once it's ready. So we have 3 expert speakers for today's webcast. Steve Elliott is the Senior Marketing Director for Schneider Electric Process Automation, Control, and Safety Offerings. He is TUV Certified Functional Safety Engineer with more than 20 years experience in the process control and automation industry and has extensive experience in safety systems and the Safety Lifecycle PLC, DCS, and SCADA systems. Steve resides on several steering committees and has the pleasure of working with many end users to improve the safety of our industry. He is a recognized presenter at industry forums and events and has published many articles and white papers and is a patent holder. Jimmy Miller, Process Safety Business Development, is a member of the North American Process Safety Business Development Team for Schneider Electric and is based in Houston, Texas. Jimmy has more than 20 years experience in the process industry and has spent the last 10 years specializing in process and functional safety applications, ESD, FGS, BMS, and HIPPS. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Technology from Southeastern Louisiana University and holds both a Certified Functional Safety Expert and a TUV Rhineland Functional Safety Engineer certification. Steve Apple, Global Director of Operator Performance Services, started his career as an automotive engineer, crashing cars into the wall for General Motors. After that, he entered the world of instrumentation and control for mineral processing, advancing later to chemical and refining processes and process control. Steve served on the ISA 18.2 committee, authoring the section on advanced alarming. He is a member of the ISA 101 committee. Today he works for Schneider Electric and is the Global Director of Operator Performance Services. He deals with alarm management, control system tuning, high-performance HMI, and control room digitalization and human design factors. Before we get started, be sure to check out the resources available to you on the left-hand side of the console. Download the PDF file of the presentation and you'll have access to the links for the checklist, article, and upcoming innovation days, as well as the blogs described here. There is no doubt that we are in an amazing transformational era of fast accelerating technology evolutions that have forever changed the business of manufacturing. There's a lot to get excited about on that digital frontier. Organizations the world over are investing vital resources into digital transformation, unlocking new realms of possibility and creating new business models. But what happens to the existing legacy automation systems, for example, the automation and safety systems that are currently controlling and protecting those manufacturing assets? How do they come along on the digital journey? So, Steve Elliott, if everything is working, operations, they're making money, why upset the status quo?
Well, thanks, Mark, and thank you to everyone for taking the time out from their busy day to join us. Justifying safety system upgrades has been a challenge for probably just about as long as I can remember. And there doesn't seem to be a common way of doing it. Organizations do a good job, some struggle. So obviously anything that we can do to share, to learn, help each other is a good thing. So you mentioned that organizations are heavily investing in digitization and digital transformation. So that means that unfortunately everybody is now competing for those limited resources being people and budget, obviously. So let's face it, no matter what business you're in, it's a fact of life that there is never enough money, never enough resources, certainly never enough time to do everything. So we got to make some tough decisions on what to invest in, and more importantly, what we can defer or not invest in at this moment in time. So I see it that the problem is kind of twofold. When it's competitive, everyone's competing for the same pot of money and people. How do you create that business case that beats the others and wins the money and people? Secondly, how do you find the right balance between investing in this digital transformation and revolution that's happening, but also bringing those legacy systems along, because they're fundamental to maintaining operations and obviously making money. And there's kind of now a third dimension that makes it even more challenging, because many of the people who originally purchased that legacy equipment or have operated it over the years or maintained it and installed it, they're retiring from the industry. So we've got a whole new generation who now have to justify the investment.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that one of the big challenges that we see for safety systems is everything is great all the time. So a safety system gets started up, it runs, it takes care of business, and it becomes a victim of its own success. So it goes about their day taking care of business 24/7, silently in the background, continuously taking care of those vital safety functions and keeping operations running, keeping people safe, and protecting profits. So it does become very difficult to justify that upgrade.
Yeah, I agree with that also. First of all, thank you, Mark, for holding this forum for us, and we hope you'll get something out of it today, those of you that are listening. The problem with this is that for safety professionals, we're looking at something that's a blessing and a curse. We have safety systems that seem to be protecting things, and the curse is that means that everybody looks at that and says, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. The thing is, many years back, ARC, I think it's maybe been 10 years now, they came up with a word called interoperability. And safety systems have kind of been kept aside from that. But as you're seeing digitalization becoming more important in our community here, there are things that are happening that are making these systems so that they can become part of the profitability of the operation. We'll talk more about that, how most of my comments are going to be on that profitability and interoperability area between safety systems and control systems. Mark?
Great. So by flying under the radar, how do the safety systems compete for attention, money, and resources? Well, where do people decide where to start?
So thanks, Mark. So as I said earlier, there doesn't seem to be a common way. So I'm a very simple man, and my wife reminds me that quite often. So I kind of looked at what I've learned over the years and tried to distill it into these simple 7 steps. Now, step 1 is going to sound really obvious, but it is show me the money. Always start with what is the best approach to secure that funding and which approach to use. Step 2, focus on people. If I've learned anything over the years, it doesn't matter how data-driven you are, how much information you put in front of people. If you don't win their hearts and minds, they will find 1,000 ways not to do something. So the more stakeholders you engage, the more support you can build, the more consensus you get, the more successful you'll be. And then when? Time is always the biggest issue. There's never a right time. There's always a wrong time. Nobody wants to do anything and then halt or stop production and the revenue-making machine. So there's a couple of factors around when. There's when do you start the process versus when do you implement the upgrade. And then we look at how. How can you sell this to the relevant people in a simple, easy-to-understand way And at the end of the day, this is all about business risk and risk to the business. So fitting this into the overall risk-based approach and supporting the business case from that one. And then we get to the how do you sell it piece. Well, obviously, in this day and age, nobody gives their money away for free. Everybody wants to know the return on investment and obviously what the investment decision is, more importantly, what they'll get back in return. So then there needs to be some upside. Step 6, the benefits, the benefits, the benefits. Just comparing an old system with a new, like for like, is not going to win that battle. So what new value can I create to the organization? What value can I unlock? What are the things I could do now that I couldn't do before that help fit in with that digital transformation and that journey? And then last but not least is probably the hardest one and one of the lessons that I've learned. My favorite step is actually 7, which is how on earth do you actually pitch this to win? Probably the most nerve-wracking time, probably more nerve-wracking than being on this call today, because that's effectively where you've done all the hard work, you've put everything together, you get to that final moment and don't stumble. So 7 simple steps, that's sort of distilled 20 years of learning, and I think what we need to do is to focus on those and take a better look, an in-depth look.
Well, great. Thank you. It's not so simple, or more people would be doing it. So it's good that we're talking about the goal is to secure the funding. The saying, show me the money, comes to mind, and I'm glad you mentioned that. What approach should be involved when people ask for funding? I mean, there's so many ways to go about it.
So the good news is that there's typically not a right way or a wrong way, but it is distilled into every organization's operations and budgeting cycle. So the first thing, and I want to reiterate this, is doing a replacement in kind provides little or no benefit. The goal here is not to compare the new to the old or just to update me to the current platform, but we need to connect the project investments, because there's often multiple ones going on, so that we connect that to the gains, unlock the potential, create new value, get that return on investment, and more important than ever is to focus on the financial justification and the benefits gained. And that's very difficult on a safety system that effectively doesn't potentially create any more production throughput or capacity or anything else. Steve, Apple, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, if any of you have been to our user group meetings in the last few years, you know we've at Schneider we've been on a kick about what we call profitability, and Peter Martin even handed out at our last user group certified profit engineers T-shirts to everyone who attended our user group. We're starting to examine more closely every day those things that can allow you to return ROI rather than just identifying I can make the plant run and I can keep it from shutting down and keep from killing people. How do those things actually return you money? And I talked a little bit about interoperability as being a key to this. So as you move into funding, you're going to look at things for system upgrades. There's typically 2 options. One is ask for full funding, and the other is to do a front-end study to find out, well, you know, is this going to help me? And any safety systems vendor worth their salt out there can help you with this and can bring in the proper people to get you on the path. Jimmy, do you have more to say about that?
Yeah, I have to say this is probably my favorite topic when it comes to safety. So normally us safety guys, we deal in numbers and we deal in risk factors and we deal in things like that. So when it comes to actual project funding, it's a whole different discussion for us. But you know, regardless of which approach you take to get your funding, the critical success factor is how you're going to define and agree with what success looks like. So what success looks like to me certainly is what is going to be different than the way it looks to you, Mr. Apple, and to you, Mark. So you have to agree on what success looks like for you, and it really can't be based on personal opinion. You know, every job out there, whether you're an engineer, whether you paint cars for a living, whether you're a cook in a kitchen, you know, it's all about personal opinion sometimes, and sometimes your personal perspective isn't really what everyone else sees as important to them. So you really have to get together with that perspective and come up with some way to get buy-in from others And I think the biggest thing is we need to get those business objectives tied into some type of measurable success. So that's why I say this is my favorite part, because as a safety guy, it's all about measurable success, right? So, the best way to do that is begin engaging your colleagues, your peers, and all those stakeholders, and they get buy-in, not just from the people who love and believe in what you do as a safety engineer, but from operations, from maintenance, and every aspect and every stakeholder that we have there. Mark?
Good. So I'm glad you mentioned the multiple parties involved. From your experience, who typically needs to be involved in developing the business case? So many options.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's more than you would first think. So I'm an introvert guy. I don't like talking to people. I tend to go and talk to the few people that I get on well with and enjoy time with. What I've learned is it's the people you don't talk to and you don't spend the time with that are the ones that you do need to go and engage. This is probably, from my experience, the most difficult step, because you're often dealing with different cultures, beliefs, agendas, competing metrics, goals, etc. So talking to different parts of the organization, more importantly, understanding what challenges they have with the existing safety systems is key. So include parties with a vested interest early in the process so that you can understand and address their needs, help them to help you build the solid business case, and that also brings them along on the journey and strengthens support for the project. So seeking their input is more impactful, and the project will be more successful to help you. If you're helping them to relieve some of their challenges or pain points, that will help you. And one group that nobody should forget now is the IT department. 10 years ago, were never considered as part of a safety system or an automation upgrade. Why? They're becoming an ever more important stakeholder simply because cybersecurity now is prevalent and everywhere, and if you ignore the IT department, ignore them at your peril.
Great. So you had a lot of great points there, and now we're going to ask the audience for some participation. We have the first of two poll surveys as part of our discussion today. So poll question number 1 is, when do you start your request for funding? And certainly there are options there. You could consider it on demand, have an incident to need funding. You might have an annual budgeting cycle, 1 year ahead, for instance. Or you may plan in 3 or more years in advance in some cases. So if the audience would please go ahead and answer the poll question, we're going to consider that for just a moment before we move on. Steve, did you have some comments about this particular question?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we do see quite a lot of regional variance, different approaches, and we do see quite a lot of maturity variance. What I mean by that is the big organizations that do a very good job of risk management have very long-term plans in place, and they go prosecute those plans over time. The less mature operating companies, I was going to say fly by the seat of their pants. That's not quite the way it works, but they tend to be more reactive and wait until things are more urgent to drive. They get compelling events to try and justify the decision versus those who plan ahead. And the financial guys love nothing better than stability when it comes to cash in and cash out. Unfortunately, as engineers, we don't tend to work or think that way, and sites certainly don't help us with that.
Well, great. Thank you, audience members, for participating in this poll question. We appreciate your interaction. Now, on with the discussion.
Yeah, so first of all, looking at these results, I'm a little surprised at the high percentage on A, which is on demand, have an incident, need funding. I thought there'd have been a lot lower percentage of you that were interested in that, or that's the way you do your funding. Look, one of the things we try to do to help our clients, and you'll find that any reputable vendor out there will come and help you with things like life cycle management of the very technology that you're dealing with, and can lay out life cycle plans for you to help you with this early on, so you know things. As we get more and more into digitalization in our systems, and it's, you know, in the old days we used to be able to troubleshoot these things with a trouble light and a radio, and somebody hitting a switch somewhere, or a limit switch, and figuring out what was going to happen. We could figure out the safety systems pretty straightforwardly. They were all mechanical in nature, basically. But as we're entering the digital age more and more, they're becoming more and more digital. And there's a lot of elements involved. So things like, you know, when is my Windows 10 going to stop being supported, or Windows, whatever it is you're working on these days? Or when is the other elements of these things? When do manufacturers have end of life on the items that are part of this system? And then all the interconnected systems, when are they failing? I need to kind of have a matrix of where those, at least a timeline of where all those things are failing. Any good safety systems vendor can help you with this. Certainly, we do this a lot for people for life cycle planning, so they know, you know, when what computer type is going to stop being supported, that they've got something on, when we're going to stop manufacturing things, when they reach end of life, and when you need to change over. So this can help you with your cutover planning and that sort of thing. The failing to plan will make a plan that fails. It's an old Benjamin saying. So what's that?
It was Benjamin Franklin. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say it was Benjamin Franklin saying, but the point is that any good vendor can help you with this. We certainly do a lot of this, and we're willing to help anyone on this call that has questions about where am I in the systems that I'm using. That'll help you with your timing an awful lot.
So let me just add to that, which is don't wait until it's too late. The earlier you can start, the better off you'll be, and then it's easier to adjust a plan as you go. Again, what we're seeing, you know, turnarounds between shutdowns and access and availability of equipment, you know, is 5-7 years, and obviously the high hazard industries want to extend those as long as possible. So timing is twofold. It's when do I start planning? Can I get ahead? When do I execute? And there was one organization I was dealing with. It was a chemical plant. One of their major equipment items, it was actually a compressor, failed. So obviously operations were shut down. There was a 3-month window that now suddenly opened itself up. You could say it was an opportunity. They actually executed 95% of their modernization work on that plant. So not just the automation systems, but valves and piping and equipment, because they had planned ahead, they had their work packs ready, they'd been through those with the operations and maintenance team, so they were ready to go. So if the unexpected happens, then you're in a much better position to be able to capitalize on that, and then it becomes an opportunity, not a curse. Jimmy?
Yeah, right. I believe, I agree with those for sure, Mr. Elliott. And I think that, you know, when you're looking at customers, they're worried about the speed of change of technologies. And I liked earlier on your discussion there, you said, don't wait until it's too late. I would really love if everyone would listen to that statement, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But, you know, a lot of our customers are having to do exactly that, keep up with the speed of change, whether it's operating systems, whether it's new cybersecurity threats or technologies that really weren't considered because you know, cybersecurity issues didn't really exist in the manner they do today, maybe 15 years ago. Component obsolescence and all those things. But, you know, going back to what Steve Apple said early, you know, if your vendor can give you a formal published lifecycle policy, I think that's really important in how you decide to move forward with your technologies, whether it's you know, just from a primary hardware and software perspective, as well as all the other things that need to be considered when you're moving forward with that type of thing. But the biggest thing is trying to keep up with the speed of change with technology, because things are happening so quickly, for sure. Mr. Mark, next question, please, sir.
Good. So time is always the enemy, and you covered some of the factors involved. Are we complete on deciding when?
There's never a good time, so yeah.
Very good. On to step 4. So for step 4, you suggest using a risk-based approach. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means, what it entails?
Certainly. So let me start. So one of the challenges, of course, this is all about probability, risk, likelihood, and consequence. So what are we trying to do? Obviously, we're trying to reduce any unplanned outages as a cause of aging or failing equipment. We're trying to extend the operating life. We're trying to mitigate those potentially hazardous events. So it's simple as it's down to probability, likelihood, and it will be a when, a not if, because ultimately everything fails, and I'm probably the best example of that. My eyesight's going, my back creaks, I can no longer run without knee support. So it happens to all of us, you know. So, but my point is, you know, there's two ways that I've seen companies use to try and explain this to the various stakeholders. Okay, because I'm a visual person. One of the ways is to use the risk matrix, because every organization has one. They may all be slightly different. They may have different, you know, 4x4, 5x5, 8x8, turn them around the other way, but everybody is relatively comfortable with a risk matrix. So it's a good visual way of showing if we don't do that, then the probability of something else happens, and that's our risk gap. So we've got this risk gap. Now we have a number of projects. Well, okay, for every dollar that I would spend, which project gives me the most risk reduction? And that's a simple way of trying to show it visually through a risk matrix, but also then justify it through risk reduction per dollar spend. Those are two tools or techniques that I've seen that help to visualize this and show it to the various stakeholders.
Yeah, Steve, I think that's really interesting you said that. You know, I meet with a mountain bike group every week, and there's lots of different people in our group, right? There's people like me, there's engineers, there's people that work in kitchens, there are financial people, and just last night we were riding. I was riding with an investment guy, and we were talking about what I do for a living versus what he does for a living, and we basically do the same thing, right? We analyze risk and we determine how much risk that a company or a person, individual, is willing to take, and then we come out with some type of investment strategy for them. That's the same thing for us on the process safety side, but it's so difficult when you get all those stakeholders in a room together to get the finance guy on board, because he understands this whole risk-based approach you're talking about. But to get everyone on board, I think that's one of the more difficult things. You have to go look at things like parts obsolescence, because the maintenance and operations guy, they understand that language. And also talking about those emerging cybersecurity threats, you know, the IT person, the IT stakeholder in the room, they have to understand. So, you know, it's one thing to talk about a risk-based approach, but being able to cater that risk-based message to all different stakeholders in the room, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But if you at least know, what each individual stakeholder has interest in, it's easier to build that risk-based approach methodology you're talking about, for sure. You got anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to that. I wanted to mention that one of the things, once again, I go back to that word I used earlier, interoperability. The fact that we're becoming more digital in nature in the information, and it's not so much digital in that I can push information to a safety system. We certainly want, from a cyber standpoint, to protect from that level of somebody being able to enter things. But the ability to push information out of that system as to what's going on and get it back into people's hands is becoming more and more prevalent. And you're starting to see new tools come out that appeal to that capability to start looking at things in real time or in near real time to see what's going on in my safety system. And I wanted to expand just a little bit. Steve was talking about the risk reduction matrix. The visualization that a risk reduction matrix gives you, the picture's worth 1,000 words. And it gives you something you can present even to management, and they can understand because they can see the picture, because you may understand all the percentages and numbers underneath, but to translate that to somebody, a picture is always a good thing to use. Now, I'll remind you that Mr. Elliott let us know that he is an introvert, so he doesn't like to brag on himself about a lot, but he does have a patent, I think that was mentioned in his introduction, on real-time risk matrix analysis. And there are tools available that are coming out that have that capability where you can see the actions and the changes that you make in your system in real time, see what kind of changes they make to your risk matrix, gives you something to take to management and say, well, if I don't spend this money, or if I don't do this thing here, or whatever it may be, I'm going to increase my risk level, and we're going to have to enter a new SIL layer, or whatever it may be that's going to happen. Very visual in nature. It's very valuable to, especially to management. Mark?
Very good. So it was stated earlier in the conversation that the goal is not to compare the new system to the old system, but to unlock potential, to create new value, and obviously demonstrate a clear return on investment. Can you share a little bit more on those points?
Yes, so let me take that one first, and then I'll let the other guys add some context. For me, typically, I see three reasons. There's always many reasons, but I've tried to keep this simple. You're either being driven by a specific requirement, something breaks, or you've had an audit violation, or there's an observation, or there's an improvement. It could be new regulations, new standards, because they're always trying to catch us out. It may be corporate edicts that are coming down through the organization. So there's some requirement that forces us into this reason to change. What I think we're seeing now, and this is where the digital transformation piece comes in, is typically more opportunistic, more opportunity. What do I mean by that? There's another event, or there's the timing of another project that if we can bring these things together, then we can create, we can capitalize on that window or that opportunity to do it. It could be something really as simple as the opportunity to do it now is because part of the plant's unavailable, be that an outage, a shutdown, or a turnaround. And the third way, and I struggle to articulate this, but it's what I call strategic decision. What I mean by that is there is some means of gaining a competitive advantage, because at the end of the day, every operating company, no matter where they are, has more competition than they can. Our goal is always to outsmart the competition or beat them. So if there's some means of gaining a competitive advantage, reducing turnaround, shutdown time, keeping operations up, being able to capitalize on market spot rates as we can reduce the production capacity, those are ways of helping the business capitalize. So that becomes slightly more strategic. It may be that the organization has some vision of the future. There is a goal, there is a strategic objective that the organization wants to get to. So we may have to bring those systems along with us as part of that strategic decision. It may just be that these are strategic, specific investments for long-term gains, because at the end of the day, a lot of the operating assets that were built 20, 30 years ago, they were originally designed for a 20, 30-year operating life. They're still running today, and their operating life's being extended for another 20, 30 years. So there are long-term gains to be had as well that maybe we have to sow the seeds of. Steve, could you add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to jump right in there. I was preempting you there a little bit. Anyway, look, once again, I'll go back to the ROI questions with the newer technologies and the capabilities. As you look into some of the newer systems, you'll find out that the information sharing and the information interchange starts becoming very valuable to you. There's a lot going on. We're seeing on the operations side, we're starting to see a lot of people, S84 and ISA 18 have an interoperations committee between us right now, because a lot of people are taking SIL value for alarms for a human. And we see more and more of that. And so you're seeing people starting to use the human as a layer of protection. And one of the things that's important with that you have to ask yourself, does my operator know when I'm using him as a layer of protection? Can he tell that when he gets an alarm and it's a layer of protection alarm, does he know the difference between that and any other alarm he's seeing on his screen? The technology is there to make that available to them. And with the new and better capabilities coming out, with the digital information, you're starting to see predictability even starting to come into the picture. So there's a lot of things as you start digitizing that information. We never understood until things got digital and we could start doing an analytics around them. We never understood what a lot of the things that were going on, but the patterns that come out of this start developing very quickly. And you'll find that it's no longer just protection. It gets you into a new layer of where it's a return on the investment, because rather than something getting shut down, somebody's making an action, somebody's doing something about it early in the game because of either predictability or visualization that is now capable with these newer systems. Jimmy?
Yeah, that's a funny discussion too. When you're just talking about ROI, return on investment, 10 years ago as a safety engineer, no one ever came to me and said, hey, can you help me define an ROI? Because at the end of the day, a safety system was installed because you're not supposed to damage the environment or your people, your assets. And that was really it. It really wasn't as much of a discussion as it is today. But, if you look at the latest revision of IEC 61511, there are new requirements around documentation, for instance, and new requirements around cybersecurity hazard identification that wasn't there before. And there's a cost associated with those types of things. So even though we're not going to, maybe you can't convince upper management to upgrade a system because of a new standard, you can convince them that, hey, this new standard requires that we have to do these additional efforts, and there's a big cost associated with it. Maybe if we upgrade the system and put some new technologies in place, it would help us with auto documentation or auto testing, all those things that we know is going to cost our company money to operate moving forward. So to replace the emergency shutdown system, an old legacy one, with a new one, it's hard to define that the value for it. But if you're talking about a more complex system, like a burner management system, for instance, if you can increase the efficiency of that burner based on a new safety system, then it's much easier to define that. And when you look at what NFPA 85, 86, and 87 says around burners, there's lots of technology advancements that you can do today that's going to make the plant operate more efficiently, which is going to create more profit for the company for itself. I believe we have
and I'd like to add, before we move on to the poll question, Jimmy, that a lot of that capability is only there with the newer technology that you can put in place. The legacy systems will just be as they were. There will be a switch that switches things off, right?
Well, and that is a great lead in to the poll question. So the next poll question is, opinion, which of the following is the primary driver to update your safety system? Is it a requirement? Does something break? Or is there an audit violation, a new regulation? Is there an opportunity, another event, or timing involved? Strategic decision. Is there something gaining a competitive advantage or specific investment over the long term? Or some combination of the above? If the audience could please respond to the poll question, and then we'll look at the results coming in. Oh, there we go. There's some people responding. But,
just whilst we're doing that, Mark, there was something that occurred to me, which was one of the soft points from the previous conversation that often gets overlooked is the access to expert knowledge, because we've been doing such a good job as automation engineers in making everything more efficient, automating everything, reducing the number of people we have, not just on site but off site. That limited access to expert knowledge brings difficulty in troubleshooting issues. It increases the time to resolve issues. It extends schedules and projects because we need those few experts, and very often they're stretched few and far between. So a pain point, in the ROI is actually the access and availability to that expert knowledge, because when it's not there, it's kind of too late. So I just wanted to add that. It occurred to me during the conversation before the poll. So interesting in the poll as the results come in. Again, it's never any one clear deciding factor, and this is kind of the complexity that we have. It would be lovely if there was just one of those three. So I'm pleased, if you like. This reinforces the challenge of justifying this. It's never any one thing that says, bang, we need to do this. It is, unfortunately, the sum of the three. So thank you, everybody who filled that in, because the good news is it confirms everything that we've heard and seen from the different parts of the world as well, and across different operating companies, even different segments, different sectors of the industry. So the good news is you're all in the same boat. The bad news is you're all in the same boat.
Great, thank you very much. So the next step is focusing on the benefits. This reminds me of the classic carrot and stick adage, the carrot being used to justify the awards versus the stick to justify the risks. What insights or experiences can you share on these points?
Well, I have to say, as safety engineers, it's always easy for us to focus on the negative because we are always looking at the consequence, and that's what we're trying to mitigate. So it's all too easy when building a business case to focus on the negatives because that's in our DNA. We can list all the potential downsides, the risk, the consequence, and the potential of not implementing an upgrade or bringing the equipment along. So I'm not saying that you should overlook those, but what we've tended to find is that this negative approach, it kind of leaves a long-lasting, disconcerting image in the mind and a sour taste in the mouth of the decision makers. So if we can focus on the positives, if we can realize that approach is ineffective and then motivate people, because at the end of the day, everybody's motivated to do a better job for their organizations. If we can highlight the potential upsides and the value to the business, go on the positive on the reward side, the carrot side, and it could be as simple as just think about modern technology now, how it reduces energy costs. It could be that with virtualization, you can reduce the infrastructure, the number of machines, that again reduces footprint, reduces maintenance, reduces energy. So if we can try and this is the hardest one of all, it's break the cost fixation. Everybody focuses on cost. We need to look at uptime, increased reliability, increased performance, uptime, etc. So for me, the hardest part is to focus on the rewards, but that's where you need to put the most attention. Steve?
Yeah, I guess I go back in my days to, I was in a power plant one time, and the guys in the shop were laughing about the fact that the IT guys had shut down their internet access. They decided that people shouldn't be looking at the internet while they were working, and they were just laughing out loud that, that's where we buy our spare parts on eBay. So they thought that was hilarious. But it's getting more and more. I was very pleased on this poll to see that 3 people out there said the strategic decision means of gaining a competitive advantage or a specific advantage for long-term gain. I'll tell you, the 3 of you could have been presenters on this. I'd love to hear what you're doing at your organizations. And in fact, we have a user group coming up. If any of the 3 of you would like to share what you're seeing, you talk to Steve Elliott. I'm sure that we can find a place for you either there or to write a white paper about what you're doing. This is what people want to hear. Why are you looking at this as a strategic decision when we always just looked at it as a cost? It always just cost us things. But I think people are starting to realize that that an operator is the guy who gets blamed every time something breaks in the plant. And I work mostly on the operation side, and I can tell you they don't like that. Every time something happens is you did this wrong or you did that wrong. They would like nothing better than to understand things that are coming, that are going to happen, that can shut that unit down. So as the safety system starts saying, I'm not just a shutdown system, I'm an information system for what's going to happen if you don't do something, operators love that. And we're looking more and more into ways that we can deliver that information, not necessarily as an alarm, because an operator can't operate on something right away, but as something that's an information to him to say, you're coming up on the maximum hours on this pump, or you're coming up on a pressure that you're very close to a relief valve pressure, and your slope on that pressure is pretty high right now. You might want to consider this. Not necessarily alarms, but information to let somebody know what they need to do to keep things from shutting down. This will reduce operating costs by unplanned shutdowns and all the possible things that can happen with that. I don't need to go into detail about that because you know it, but we love it when the operations side can get some of that safety stuff to come over and help us to do our jobs. Jimmy?
Right, Steve. That's a good point for sure. And I think that, from us, from a vendor's perspective, historically, we as well as our customer project managers during project execution, we've always focused primarily on the successful safety project implementation. So just getting the funding, doing the schedule, doing all the things you need to do and starting it up and giving the keys to operations and walking away. But increasingly, really in the last 5 years especially, the market has begun to recognize that there's lots of value at looking more closely in the maintenance and operation phase of the safety life cycle, because that lasts much, much longer than just the identification of the project and execution of the project itself. So I think that, there's lots of new technologies around and innovation around helping customers unlock new potentials that really wasn't considered because it really wasn't even a thought, when the original system was designed and implemented. So Steve Apple earlier talked about a real-time safety risk assessment. That's something that has lots of value when you're talking about executives and C-level type in an organization, knowing how safe their system is right now at this moment in time. And that kind of thing just didn't come up. It wasn't even a consideration before because that type of technology didn't even exist. And if you're looking at what it costs to maintain a system around proof testing and around logic validation and revalidation of systems, there are new technologies out there that really help decrease the cost of those. So when you can unlock those new opportunities, a lot of times you didn't even know existed when you installed the original system. That's where your real value is for sure. Mr. Mark, you want to move on to step 7, sir?
Great. So we've looked at funding approaches, who should be involved, what the best timing is, risk, reward, benefits. Well, now what? What's left to consider?
So for me, the most nerve-wracking part, if I'm brutally honest with you, which is standing up in front of a room of decision makers and executives and managers and putting my case together that we need to do this. But there was one customer, I've never forgotten this, and I've always remembered it. He said, Steve, look, I need your help. I need to go sell this to my boss or to my manager. He says, can you make this simple? In 2 minutes, or 20 words or less, your choice. He says, just tell me, what is it, what does it do, and why should I care? 3 things I've always remembered. And you can, change the wording slightly, but that was really simple. How do I deliver this quickly, succinctly, and specifically to the point, and then let people ask questions? It's very difficult to ramble. It's very difficult to stay focused. I think passion and belief, and let's face it, if you don't believe in why you're asking for money, why would the management believe you? This whole concept, I know everybody says the elevator pitch. I was at a conference, and there was a very high-ranking executive staying at a coffee table. I took a deep breath. I had 30 seconds of bravery, went up, introduced myself, started to have a conversation. He asked me a question, and I stumbled, and I was nervous, and I didn't have the information. And that little window that I had created by being brave was suddenly, it just sort of disappeared. I'd lost it. And I'm absolutely convinced that those type of conversations happen more frequently than we care to. As much as we'd like everything to be formalized and scheduled, you get these little windows. Be persistent, get to the point. If people are interested, they will ask you how and why. So for me, what is it do, and why should I care? And it's the hardest thing to simplify and bring down into something that's really quite punchy and quite meaningful. It's easy to produce lots of content. It's very difficult to produce small, succinct, polished, and easy to understand. So that's just kind of one of the lessons that I've learned, never forgotten. For what it's worth, it's stood me in pretty good stead over the years.
Great, thanks. We've covered a lot of ground as these experts have explained how safety is a profitable investment. Of course, there are resources competing for time, resources, and money, but keep in mind the bigger picture. Safety system modernization can be aligned as part of the digital transformation journey and improve profits, productivity, and performance while lowering risk. So now we do have a little bit of time for your questions. And as we move into the Q&A session, I'll remind you of the resources available to you on the left-hand side of the console. Download the PDF file of the presentation, and you'll have access to the links for the checklist, article, and upcoming innovation days, as well as blogs. Now for the Q&A session. The audience listening live can type questions for today's experts in the Ask a Question box on the screen, and we'll answer as many as we can. Within a few days, the presentation will be available for on-demand viewing, and we'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website and send you an email message with a link connecting directly to it and to related resources after it's ready. And now, on to the questions. First, it's not clear to me, the listener asks, how these discussions fit with a digital transformation strategy. What am I missing?
Okay, I'll take the first step. So a lot of the safety systems, we need information from them. We need information in terms of demand rates, in terms of bypass rates, in terms of, the systems are talking to us, if you like, because they're permanently connected to a process. There's information to be had from them. And previously, a lot of the systems that were out there were just unable to give you that. They were never designed for it in the first place. They couldn't support it. So we now need that information. Why? To make it part of a digital transformation. What do I mean by that? Well, in simple terms, before we ever get to any safety system, we've got to do a hazard analysis. We've got to do a risk assessment. We've got to understand the causes, the consequence, the likelihood, the severity. If we digitize that, we create a digital baseline. Okay, we've got something that is referenceable, searchable, maintainable. It's something that we can now measure against. So if we now connect what is happening in an operating plant versus what we designed, now we can compare the two. We can look at what the gap is, the risk gap. We can use analytics to give us insight, visual clues, digital twins. These new digital techniques can equally be applied to safety, to process safety, to the safety systems. And at the end of the day, really, I think there's three key questions that come out of it. We get a risk gap. It's really, is it an operations problem? And Steve, you mentioned how we're still reliant on people as potentially a layer of protection to take executive actions. Is it an operations problem? Is it a maintenance problem? Or is it a design problem? So we need that information in a digital format. We can start to then run analytics on it. We can build models. We can predict what good looks like. More importantly, we can look at when we deviate from what good operating looks like and start, if we potentially start to move towards unsafe conditions. So data, information, digital, create a baseline, now use the operating information, compare the two, and now we have a new realm of possibility that we potentially didn't have before.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, we've gone from the world where the safety system in the plant used to be just a bunch of colored lights that you looked at, and they were either one color or another color, and you knew if something was going to happen by that, to the point where we now can get this digital information. There's a lot of it available, and all we're trying to do here is to help you. We can help you with this to understand how to make better use of that digital information. It's a single punch through. It's not bi-directional. It's not going to get you in trouble, but to punch it through and make use of it is the key thing. The next question.
Great. How do you measure the success of a new safety system?
So you could argue that the best safety system are the ones that nobody has ever heard of and nobody knows are operating on a plant. That used to be the old measure of success. Nowadays, unfortunately, with standards and metrics and KPIs, well, there's a couple of ways. Number one is you can look at the overall equipment effectiveness. You can look at things like uptime, availability, rework, downtime, waste, etc. But there are, let's say, metrics now on a safety system, the standards, the KPIs, demand rates, bypass time, uptime, availability. Jimmy, I'm sure I'm missing half a dozen things. Help me out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered most of it. But again, to talk about success of an upgrade or of a safety system or something else, it all has to do with your perspective, right? I mean, what the successful for me is certainly going to be different than someone else. So I think it's really based on what your objectives were before that project came about, and what the key stakeholders saw as value during that project execution.
Good. Next question. As a result of the survey, how do you help move from reactive to proactive?
Well, there's physically, how do you move from it, from a process perspective, or there's emotionally, how do you move people from a reactive to a proactive? So there's kind of two parts to that question. From a process perspective, that's relatively easy because, again, it's kind of put a stake in the ground, understand where we are today, what do we have, where is it in his operating life, what is the life expectancy, when does it run out, and Jimmy spoke about the speed of change. You look at computing power, you look at operating systems, they're typically changing every 2-3 years. So the cycle of technology, but you really need to understand what have I got now. More importantly, you then need to look at other objectives. Do you have a turnaround, or are you debottlenecking? Are you expanding operations? Have you got a re-HAZOP at some point because you've got a 3-5 year HAZOP cycle, etc. So if you take where you are, if you then look at what you have to do to your plant and the other factors that are going on around you, that's going to tell you then where you need to be. So then you can start to get to the proactive, okay, which is what do I have to do, what are the gaps, and when do I have to do it? So from a process perspective, it's easier. The hardest thing is actually mentally. It is convincing people to change from how they've always done it, which is reactive. We'll worry about it if or when it becomes a problem, to, okay, the lights just come on, now what do I do, versus, hang on, I'm going to put the car in for a service and have the oil changed because I don't ever want to get to the point of having the light come on because I may be too late.
That's a difficult thing, Steve, because sometimes if you have the expertise in house at your own facility, a person who wakes up every day and lives and breathes safety, then it's much less difficult to come up with a proactive strategy to move forward. But if you don't have those resources, it's difficult. So then you have to rely on bringing in outside resources who are willing to do that for you as well. But then you have to get investment from upper management to make that happen. So if you don't have a dedicated person there, being proactive in this kind of endeavor is very, very difficult unless you have a partner you bring in to help you with that type of proactivity for sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that once again, I stated earlier, any good safety vendor will help you with life cycle management, because you as a safety person will get blamed when suddenly something doesn't become available and you have to suddenly buy something, and you'll probably push that blame back to the vendor who didn't inform you that was coming to end of life cycle. And yet all that information should be available. We get hollered a lot about, to people saying you're into life cycle on this, we don't like that. We do that as a service to let you know things can only be manufactured for so long because of the parts that are available. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. You need to know those things ahead of time. So we actively keep that life cycle management information available for you.
Great. Time is almost up. Let's just hit one more very quickly. How does the grandfather clause impact safety system upgrades? Do I have to re-HAZOP when I upgrade?
So for those in North America, the grandfather clause has always been a great get out of jail clause. That was no pun intended. But it was kind of something you could hide. For the rest of the people who are on the call or outside of North America, we don't have the luxury of the grandfather clause. At the end of the day, it doesn't state that you have to re-HAZOP. Good practice says if you've been operating for 3, 4, 5 years and you've had potential near misses or outages or unexpected trips or whatever else, you really should be, may not be a full re-HAZOP, maybe a desktop HAZOP or whatever else, but you really should be looking at what we did 5 years ago or when we last did the re-HAZOP. Okay, what do we now know that we didn't know then? What have we learned? What can we do to improve or provide adequate protection, improve our risk posture that we couldn't do before? So a lot of people have hidden behind the grandfather clause as a means of not having to do it, but good engineering practice, risk engineers, the guys on the plant who do this every day, effectively will always go back to that because everything starts with the hazards. That's understanding what they are and then what you have to do to mitigate them and more importantly, what the potential consequence is. So rather a brief answer, but I think we're kind of reached the end of the runway, unfortunately.
Oh, great. Thanks, everybody, for the great questions from the audience. We'll try to get as many of the unanswered questions offline as we can. And thanks again to Steve Elliott, Jimmy Miller, and Steve Apple for sharing their time and expertise today. I'd also like to thank Schneider Electric for sponsoring today's webcast. And now that we're just about done, we want to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on the screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it as we use this information to improve our webcast. To receive your certificate of completion, click on the Event Resources tab on the left side of your screen and click on the link. That link will break once the webcast ends. On behalf of the CFE Media and Technology and Control Engineering, thanks for attending. This concludes our webcast. Thank you and goodbye.